Hello everybody and welcome to the Sovereign Village Project. You may have noticed the lack of videos lately, and that's partially because we're simply recovering from a lot of busy projects and trying to finish some things up. We had the Back to the Land Festival and we have been mainly working on our house build. We are just so close to being done, so we're just running against the wall right now trying to get that project done. But also a large reason that we're taking so long to get new videos made here is I'm shifting away a little bit from this point and shoot type of format. I'm still going to be doing a lot of that because that's a fast and easy way to convey information quickly. But we're also starting to work on some really in-depth projects, mainly focused on design, because here we're going into winter and we're going into food supply problems. So a lot of people are looking at their homesteads and realizing that a homestead isn't just a place to have a few pet goats running around. A homestead is a whole system that needs to be designed to not need inputs and to produce food and energy and fuel and things like that absolutely abundantly. And so a lot of people are just now starting to understand the need for design, and I think it's important for us to start conveying some of these permaculture design techniques. And so what we're going to be doing is covering some of the design projects I'm doing right here on the channel. I have some really cool design projects through my company, which is Tennessee Homestead Design, and we're designing some homesteads, but we're also doing 2 intentional community design projects, which is really exciting because we get to do a much more interesting design for a community, because it's a whole different set of needs for a group of people. But then there's also lots of micro little designs within that, little homesteads within the community that are more traditional. So it's a way to really show permaculture design with a whole bunch of different examples so people can start to understand it at an instinctual level. Which is a way a lot of people learn. So I think it's going to be a good way to, and a good time to convey that. So we're working really hard on that right now. We're trying to finish up these design projects and then make some edited videos that are going to take a lot more work basically and take a lot longer to put out. So appreciate everybody's patience with content as we catch up on all of that. Anyway, all of this to say, speaking of winter, as we go into winter, other than focusing on the design of your system, right now is also a good time to focus on compost. In fact, it's truly a necessity. Many of us, I don't need to wake everyone up to the fact that our food supply is in real trouble. And even if it wasn't, we need to stop eating commercial food. It's not good, it's not healthy, it's not nutritive, it's poison, it's very bad. So it's time to shift away from that. But if you look around this spring and decide to start growing food, you're kind of a little bit late to grow food in any kind of significant quantity, because you're going to need compost. For so many reasons, compost is really what should be your primary input into your system. We can't rely, even if it was a good idea to rely on chemical fertilizers, obviously it's not, it's destroying our entire planet, but even if it was a good idea, we can't rely on their access anymore, because one of the primary things being targeted right now in the supply chain is fertilizers. I won't bother going into the specifics of that. There's folks, content creators like Christian Westbrook over at Ice Age Farmer. He does a great job. He uses mainstream sources and really points to what's happening in the supply space. And I certainly know that too from all of my connections to farmers around the world. As a musician, I've spent many years touring all around the country, primarily in rural areas, and I've gotten to know farmers everywhere, and I just hear report after report of people not able to get fertilizers. So all that to say, food problems, no fertilizers means you got to make compost, and you need to make a lot of compost. Your production, the amount of food you can make, isn't really defined by your space. There's people on 1/10 of an acre growing commercial farms and making hundreds of thousands of dollars, growing tons and tons of food, way more than people on hundreds of acres. It's not defined by space, it's defined by your fertility. That's what really determines how much food you can make. And fertility comes from compost. So I wanted to show my compost and what I'm doing this winter, because I think a lot of folks could do it this way. But I do want to say with compost, there's no one system that works, because compost is all about inputs. It's all about looking around you and saying, what do I have access to that I can compost? And that's going to vary based on your area. A channel that I talk about a lot here, and somebody we really love, is Billy over at Permapastures Farm, Billy and William. Both compost masters, compost gurus. William has studied that really in depth with folks like Jeff Lawton. And so their compost system is very interesting and really, I think, valuable for a lot of people, because they are in an area that has a lot of restaurants, there's university, there's a food scene. And Billy, he's a good people person, so he goes out and he makes connections with restaurants and folks like that. By the way, try prying any of his sources out of him, he'll never tell you. But he makes these relationships at restaurants and universities and things, and he gets their food scraps. A lot of them are organic and stuff too, it's great. And so he drives around, I think once a week, gathers up all of these food scraps, talks with people, he brings them back to the farm, he does his compost systems, he runs his chickens, he feeds his animals with this compost, and it's an amazing system, but it wouldn't work for me very well. for one, I'm just not as good a talker as Billy. I'm just not as much of a people person. But we also just don't have that kind of business around here. We don't have a lot of restaurants in this rural area. And he's next to Asheville. That's a big foodie scene. We're in a very rural area, and we're about an hour away from a city center here. And while I could do that, it also just doesn't quite fit my personality, and there's just not that much access to good food sources like that around here. And it's just kind of not how I want to spend my time, so I need to find other inputs. But there are a billion different inputs people have. Some people have access to wood chips. I don't really have access to that. I've tried chip drop and getting some of those, but there's just not a lot of chipping happening really around here. They mostly, unfortunately, just spray everything rather than chipping it up. And there's not a lot of suburban areas that have a lot of chipping going on. So wood chips are kind of out as an option for me. Hay is one we use, but of course I can't just afford to buy tons of hay. I buy it for my animals, and I have animal beddings I pay for, like sawdust, and those enter into the compost system. But I need mass production. I need tons and tons of compost. I'm not starting a garden. I'm starting a farm this spring, and so I need a ton of compost. And there's simply not a lot of exterior sources available to me that don't require a lot of time, labor, effort, money. And I am working on some other angles I'll cover, but for this video I want to talk about the most obvious thing that's all around me and surrounding many of us, which is leaves. Every year this time of year, we are blessed with this bounty of a crop, and it's magic mulch. Now, it's not perfect mulch, there's some problems. If you take this leaf and you lay it on your garden as mulch, regardless of how composted it is, a slight wind like this blows it over, it's going to go over your seedlings and it's going to crush and kill it. I learned this all the hard way. I mulched my whole garden with leaves and tried to make little rows in between, and I planted my seeds and they all got covered up and it blocked the light. Leaves are just too big, so they do need to be chopped. And so what we do for our system here is we just rake a bunch of leaves into rows, and then we run a lawnmower over them. And that lawnmower, it's just a push mower with a bagger. That is our single largest piece of fossil fueled machinery on this farm. We do not have a tractor. We don't have anything like that. Our only other fossil fueled piece of machinery is a chainsaw. I would include, of course, our truck in that. Our truck is a major component of the farm, so that's technically our largest piece of machinery. But our second largest is the mower, and we bought it really exclusively not with lawn in mind. There is no lawn here. That's actually another input I don't have access to. I don't have grass clippings. I can't get them. I don't have grass. and so we bought it specifically for mulching these leaves. We run them over and it quickly makes really nice, fine, crumbled up pieces that are probably about this size. That's the average size that comes out of our just standard mower. And so that quickly accelerates the composting process because everything's finer, and it makes a much better kind of crumbly humus because it breaks down faster, and we get rid of that problem of leaves blowing over our compost. So all we're doing for compost this year is making big piles of leaves, chopping them up. We're making the piles about a meter or about a yard, a square yard, cubic yard. So a yard, 3 or 4 feet wide, 3 or 4 feet tall. We might go a little bit bigger. We certainly don't want to go smaller because you need a certain amount of critical mass to really get the heat going in the center of the pile and get all that microbiology happening. But we make a big pile, and that's our carbon, but we need our green stuff. We need our nitrogen, and that's what these guys are busy making for me. Is tons and tons of nitrogen. Like I mentioned, we don't have grass clippings. That's what a lot of folks use in a pile like this. They throw on their grass clippings, and that's great nitrogen, but we just don't have access to that. We do have some food scraps, and those are going to go in the pile, but it's just only what Gabby and I create. That's not that many food scraps. So our nitrogen is primarily going to be manure. We actually have the chicken coop uphill of a lot of these piles, so some of that will naturally make its way down here, but most of it we're manually taking out of the rabbit hutches and the chickens, and we're applying to this pile. Also, not to get too graphic, but I don't pee in the toilet. I'm not wasting that stuff. That's valuable input, and it's sterile and safe, and I know it's in my diet. So that's also going on our pile here, at least the ones for our personal use. And so that's providing our nitrogen. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's gonna probably get us where we need. Carbon and nitrogen, and we're doing this in the forest, so there's already tons of amazing microbiology that's gonna come in and inoculate the soil. And then we're gonna have green scraps, a lot of this type stuff from just specific projects where we're clearing some land, where we're clearing out brush. We're gonna have whatever we have, really. And when these piles are going, if something dies on the farm, a rabbit or a chicken dies, or if we have a meal and we have bones left over, or some meat goes bad in the cooler, we're going to throw that into the center of these piles that are, when they're going, they're hot, because it'll just cook right in there and break down, and that will make an amazing source of nitrogen. So we're really kind of hurting for nitrogen, but we're figuring out solutions, and the manure is going to do it for us. We have a lot of rabbits, and that's an amazing manure. So that's our nitrogen. The leaves are our carbon, as well as all of these little sticks that get raked up into the pile too. A lot of them, I find the mower just goes right through, as long as they're not big sticks. It gets chopped up just fine. I just probably have to sharpen my mower a little bit more than usual. So we're making these piles. This one's in a little bit of a divot here, and so it's going to stay where it's at. When it's fully built, it should be fine. But a lot of these I have to make a wire enclosure around them. That enclosure just holds up those sides, because remember, the more mass you're getting, the better you're going to get like this nice hot compost thing going on that's going to really break stuff down, kill all of the weed seeds, and just make a really good compost for you. So all I do is take old fencing, just used fencing. I make a circle of it, wire it together about 4 or 5 feet wide, and that's my compost pile. And so they'll just be in stations all over the property, and then we'll just manually bring it up when the time comes. And so one last note about how we're gathering all of this. I obviously don't want to just take a bunch of leaves haphazardly without thoughtfulness, without thinking about what is their role in nature. This is a beautiful, pristine forest. It's quite old in some parts of it, and I certainly don't want to damage or abuse this system. But I do feel comfortable taking from it, and so I want to talk about how I'm doing that and why I feel comfortable doing it. The how is, of course, we don't want to just strip a layer of leaves off the ground, because those leaves are there for a reason. These leaves are doing a lot of roles. That tree is reaching way deep into the ground, and it's pulling up nutrients and minerals from way under there, and it's bringing them, dropping them to the surface, where it will then break down, and it will turn into this beautiful forest humus, this composted soil. It's just amazing stuff. I've borrowed a little bit of that from my garden, and man, does that just grow amazing things. And so it's doing that. First of all, it's making a forest layer, and all of these guys, all of these plants, which are also just as crucial to the system, they're relying on that. They need those leaves, they need that, and then the tree itself needs its own nutrients back that it's producing. And there's tons of microbiology, there's tons of insects. You saw those chickens scratching around. They're feasting off of the insects that live under this, so I don't want to damage that. And these protect things. They protect a lot of nuts that fall from the trees from rotting so quickly, so that way the squirrels and other animals, deer, they have access to them too. So all this to say, I can't just take all the leaves I want. I need to think about this. So what I do is I take a row of them out with the rake, and I don't take them all. I leave them, still a scattering of leaves, and I do it this time of year because all the leaves haven't fallen. So even the areas where I'm taking leaves from, they're going to get replaced. They're going to get leaves. And then I leave areas of leaves right next to them. So I kind of rake in rows, and I don't just take all of a giant patch. So if there's a little damage to an area, it's a small area that will soon be covered up. And let's say if I removed all the acorns from that patch when I raked it up, or I removed their protection, there's patches of leaves right next to them too, so there's still going to be plenty for the wildlife. And then I also don't feel bad about taking nutrients from this forest, because they're getting returned. Our entire farm system is up there, it's uphill, and we're trying to keep every bit of energy on that site that we can and bring it back to the top of the hill, but eventually it's going to escape us. We're not going to build a perfect system, and these nutrients will come down into the forest, and they will return to where they belong. And we're also adding nutrients from off-site. Of course, we're not still to where we want, where we're eating all of our own food. We're still having to buy some food. So basically, we're taking the Midwest's topsoil and putting it on in the form of grains and such, and putting it on our property. And we have other inputs like hay and feed that we still are relying on for now. So we're adding tons of nutrients, and those are all going to get returned to this site eventually as well. And then uphill of this holler, there's about a dozen homes, and just like us, they all have septic systems that come right up to the edge of the forest. And so all of those nutrients are going into the forest. And a side note on that, I do feel perfectly safe about that, even though there's probably some pharmaceuticals and chemical stuff in that waste stream. It's filtering through a lot of soil, and then this whole gigantic compost uphill of it, this giant forest, that is a compost system. It's breaking stuff down at a molecular level and making it safe again. It's repairing the damage we humans have done. So I feel safe, and I feel comfortable taking nutrients from this forest, as long as I do it in a very careful and responsible manner. I use that method, and then I put those leaves in a pile, and we do them all over the forest, up and down, all around of our farm system. And we're going to have tons and tons of amazing compost next year. And this is the way that just myself and Gabby, just 1 or 2 people, working without machinery except for a lawnmower, and without driving all around to harvest stuff, we can get a huge amount of compost made for true commercial production. So I just hope that is useful for everybody, and I'd love to hear your composting methods as well, because there's a million of them. All right, everyone, in the meantime, stay safe, be well, and happy homesteading.